Verse 121. If things are regarded as existing by themselves, they exist because of their being so designated in words. If there were no words to designate their existence, they are not. In the previous video, in the previous verse, we looked into the understanding that nothing actually exists. And I took as the example the fact of you looking at a particular configuration of pixels on your viewing screen, and how you habitually ignore the fact that you're looking at a configuration of pixels for the backstory. The backstory being that that configuration of pixels reflects a reality based on physical objects, physical entities. For example, me and the cup. You ignore the completely uninteresting fact that these are patterns of pixels and relate to the backstory of a physical reality with objects and entities in it. We looked into that in some detail, and it's this backstory which is described as conventional understanding or worldly knowledge. It's this backstory which has to be jettisoned, because we have this backstory going on all the time. And you might argue, surely there's some basic distinction between this cup and me. Well, on the level of pixels, there isn't. Pixels are physically all the same. That's the underlying reality. Well, that's the actual reality, that you're just looking at a set of pixels. There's no inherent difference between them. But yet we'll group a certain pattern of pixels together and call it a cup, and group another pattern of pixels together and call it Guru Gillis. In the previous video I asked you to do an experiment to visualize that cup. Close your eyes and visualize that cup on a table. I don't think we've even got pixels now, have we? We haven't got anything. Nothing physical anyway. When you imagine this cup on a table, you've got a pattern of nothing on another pattern of nothing, designated by words. That pattern of nothing is a cup, the other pattern of nothing is a table. The imagined cup and the imagined table are both made up of the same thing, which is nothing. We might say that that cup has got a physical reality, the one I've just shown you, the pattern of pixels I've just shown you. But the table hasn't. The table's completely made up, constructed simply for this visualization. Although you might have imagined a table that you're familiar with, but it doesn't really matter, does it? It doesn't take away from the fact that you've got one pattern of nothing on top of another pattern of nothing, and we give them words. A cup on a table. And we're quite happy with that, because we've got a backstory about cups and a backstory about tables. That's what we relate to. We don't relate to the pixels on our viewing screen, and we don't relate to the complete insubstantiality of our mental cup on the mental table. And it's these words which reinforce the backstory. The words are what we hang on to. The words are the fuel for the backstory being that there's a world out there consisting of objects and entities. I called it a backstory. It's a story that's going on. It's a story we relate to no matter what is presented to us. Some people have backstories which may be characterized as religious or scientific. We've all got our own backstory, which is normally heavily influenced by the culture that we live in. That culture being what transmits the dominant backstory. But we each have our own individual take on that backstory. But it's a story, and what's a story? A story is a construction in words. Conventional understanding is about stories, and it's about giving different weight, different degrees of validity to particular stories. So, for example, the story of Santa Claus. If you're a child, then that might have a lot of validity. The story of Santa Claus might have a lot of validity. If you're older, it might not have so much validity, although you might still enjoy the story. If you're religious, you might believe in various gods or simply one God. And you might believe in a particular relationship with that God. You might believe it's a God of love or a God of anger, and so on. And these stories are words. Words which we ascribe various degrees of holiness to. And what's meant by holiness? The holiness is a degree to which a particular story contributes to our backstory. The backstory being our reality filter. It's what replaces what is with what we believe is. So this is the power of words. In the beginning was the Word. And this Word is our conventional understanding, our conventional reality. And it's not simply that. It represents the power by which we adhere to it. We adhere to the Word as reality. Verse 122 says, "That which exists only as word and not as reality, such is not to be found even in worldly knowledge." For example, there's a lot of things which have words to them, which we don't take as real. For example, unicorns, centaurs, elves. They're stories, and these stories, for most of us, are not strong parts of our backstory, of our reality filter. This comes from the nature of reality being erroneously understood, for no such perception is possible. So it's not possible to perceive a unicorn or a centaur. But what this verse is telling us is that anything which is designated by a word has no substantial reality. And you will argue with this because of your backstory. You will argue with this because you've got a backstory, either a backstory which could be characterized as scientific or religious. And you'll use this as a justification for allowing your attention to be hijacked by it. All backstories are simply that, they're simply stories. And as enlightenment practitioners, we realize this, just as we realize that all the pixels on our viewing screen are simply that, they're simply pixels and of no intrinsic interest. So there's no reason for our attention to be diverted by them. And we can rest once more in our essential nature. We can allow the attention to rest once more in itself and bring our sense of reality back here, rather than having it dissipated out there in the apparent multiplicity of objects.